Hello, everyone, and welcome. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the Art of Inspired Selling. As you know, my name's Catherine Nunez, and I'm the host of the show where I find super interesting, successful entrepreneurs that took this time, the pandemic. I don't know, are we ending the pandemic? Are we going to say it's over? But they didn't just survive during this time, but they thrived. Now, if you haven't watched an episode of the Art of Inspired Selling, welcome. It's a longer show format where my guests come on and they deliver information that will move the needle for you in your business or in your personal life. It's primarily designed for entrepreneurs, B2B service based entrepreneurs, and those people that want to make a difference in the lives of others. So today, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my next guest, who is Dr. Howard Rankin. He's a director of science at Intuality Inc. He has extensive expertise and knowledge in the areas of psychology, neuroscience, behavior change, and neurotechnology. Those are some big words. He has been an academic, researcher, and practitioner, and is also an experienced speaker, coach, and best-selling and award-winning author. He's written 12 books in his own name, co-written another 10, and ghostwritten 30 others. I want to just say congratulations on that right now. I can't even get my first one out. And it takes me like a month to get a blog out. So welcome. I see some people are joining. Remember, this is an interactive show. If at any time you have a question, please drop it in the chat. We're using Restream if you need to give them permission, whatever. We have people joining us from Twitter, Twitch, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you're at, give us a shout out. We'll give you a shout out right back. And let's get started. Welcome. How are you today?
I am great. Thank you so much for that kind introduction.
Yes,
Catherine, it's great to see you again.
The more I do research on podcasts and live shows, and they say, capture your audience in the first couple of seconds. And I'm like, okay, well, I got to tell you who's going to be talking to see if you even want to stay around, right? You want to stay around and learn who this fabulous person is that we've brought to you. So where are you coming live from today?
I am coming live to you from Hilton Head Island, South Carolina.
How is living in Hilton Head?
It's great, really. I've lived here quite a long time now. I was fortunate enough to be recruited. I was raised in England. Some of you may have guessed that a little bit from my accent. Raised in England, did all my studying in England, PhD, spent 10 years working in the addiction field, then moved to a private hospital. Then a friend of mine opened a behavioral wellness program in Hilton Head. And once he got it going, he invited me to come over and be the clinical director. Hey, somebody's got to do it, right?
That's right.
So, and I've been here ever since, which is a long time, about half my life now. Yeah, it's a lovely place to live. Gorgeous beach, well preserved, lots of trees, nature. It's fabulous.
Super nice. Well, you guys know I'm stuck here in sunny San Diego, where it's just miserable. It's just miserable to live.
Yeah, San Diego's a pretty good spot.
Interestingly enough, I'm considering a relocation because my oldest son was just accepted to Georgia Tech. Woohoo! He's going to pursuing a master's in artificial intelligence, and so
wow.
That move for him from California, he's a principal cellist here at Chapman University, moving to the East and him being so far from me for the first time, I'm like, I'm just going to be in a box under the bridge in downtown Atlanta, just in case you need me, just in case. All right. So let's get on. So, one of the things that I always ask my guests on the Art of Inspired Selling is what inspires you to do what you do? Writing is a gift. It's a talent, it's something that you've obviously perfected, right? But what inspires you to get up and do that? What inspired you to become an author? I know in academia, right, there's a lot that you have to write, but is there something that you, Howard, use for inspiration, something you can share with the audience?
Well, it's interesting, and a question I think is always an interesting question to ask somebody
Hmm.
is, as a kid, what did you like to do? And a lot of the times we forget that. We might remember specific episodes, um, but as a kid, I liked to write. I was a writer. I wrote, for the school magazine and all of that. And interestingly enough, I had developed the style that
Hmm.
is hopefully sort of related to wisdom, which was sort of challenging a lot of things. And I has assumed that I had developed that over the course of my career in thinking about things and writing and things in a challenging way. And quite a few years ago, I was going through some of the family stuff, and I found a notebook from elementary school, and there was the same style right there when I was like 10 years old. It's really interesting. And a lot of people I spoke to or speak to, say, that happened to me. I thought that I got into whatever because of this. And then
Yes.
I found my yearbook and everyone said, oh, good luck with it.
It was
So,
there all along. All
yep,
along.
yep, it
Yes.
was there all along. And so, I enjoyed writing. Actually, as I was getting into my career, writing didn't appear to be a very promising career. Way back in the last millennium when I grew up, it didn't appear to be a promising career. So I went into psychology. So that was really cool. And this latest sort of iteration of myself came about through a combination of stupidity and disaster. Uh, um, and
I'm learning to call that your shit pit. I can cuss on my own show, right? So you fell into something, and
yes,
this beautiful result came about afterwards, right? Transformation, if you will.
yep, yep, yes, no, absolutely. And an amazing journey, a wonderful lesson. I'm just bringing out a book called about it, and more importantly, how people in that situation who make mistakes and find themselves
Hmm.
cut off, shamed, humiliated, disgraced, guilty, what are the things they need to do to make the best of what seems like a bad situation, but actually is an invitation for you to step up and do something different.
That's
And
going to be very powerful. Very powerful, because I'm starting to read a little bit more about Brene Brown right now, and
right,
she talks
yes,
so much about
yep,
vulnerability
yep,
and the ability to be vulnerable. And for me, uh, as a woman now, as a Latina female in corporate America, when I was in there, you cannot be vulnerable. The more vulnerable you are, the weaker you appear to be. And there's these vultures or coyotes, corporate men, maybe even some women back in the day that were just
mhm,
waiting to pounce on your failure so that they
yep,
could point you out
right,
and take over your sales position, take over your territory, take over your
right.
your clients if you're in a competitive environment. So yeah, how do you rise out of that? How do you discard the victim mentality? So let's talk about that. So today the title of the talk that you're going to do is the art of wisdom. What made you, now I love mine, right? The art of inspired selling.
Right.
What caused you to come up with that title, the art of wisdom?
Well, as I started out on this journey almost 10 years ago,
Hmm.
I really got interested in what was then the emerging field of cognitive neuroscience, or to put it more simply, how we think. And I really got involved in that. I got involved in some projects with a great company, Intuality, which I'm now the science director, who were involved in that. And, my podcast is called How Not to Think. And it really helped me understand um, the limitations of thinking that we have and how you have to adapt that if you really want to be wise. Now, there's a difference between being smart and wise.
Mm-hmm.
Being smart, you could know a whole lot of stuff. And often, if you think of yourself as smart, that might come with a kind of maybe inflated sense of self-esteem. Wisdom, on the other hand, is recognizing what you don't know, okay, and therefore comes more likely with an attitude of humility, which I think is really important. And so, that distinction I think is really key. And so I started really investigating this. How do we think? Do do we really know what we're doing? Is so much of it habitual? What biases do we use, et cetera, et cetera?
Biases are big. Biases are really big. I didn't. I don't want to sidetrack us so much, but I just have a short story about a bias that I just really experienced, and I share my shortcomings with the world. But I drove my son to school, and I saw this sign for a sheriff election that's going on in Encinitas,
Mhm,
California, and the person running's name was Kelly Martinez. And so this is just how that unconscious bias works, right? The how we can reframe things. So I saw that Kelly Martinez, and I thought, oh, a Latino. I I don't know what they're doing, but I'm voting for them.
right,
And then
right.
I thought that was number one. That was just like no thought process happened.
Yeah,
Number
absolutely.
two, Kelly Martinez. Then I thought, wait, is Kelly a man or is Kelly a woman?
Hmm.
And then I thought, okay, well, if Kelly's a woman, did she fight in the war? Was she a military person? What makes her qualified? How would
Hmm.
her emotions interact with making decisions to be a and then I was like, holy crap, look at all these things you thought of from the time you saw that sign to the
Hmm.
stop sign,
Hmm.
from a woman, a Latina woman that wants to fight for the rights of women, women of
Hmm.
color. And then all of that went on in my head. I was like, oh my gosh, what somebody else who's not aware and doesn't have curiosity, what must they go through? And is all that thinking that was happening in my head, how not to think,
Hmm.
is that conscious?
Ah,
Which part of my brain was that taking place in?
well, that's a really interesting part of this because in some senses we overrate consciousness. Um, we have, and most people, of course, have heard about different ideas of the subconscious,
Hmm.
but we have this amazing mind body, which is the collection of the trillions of cells, including neurons, that make up who we are. And these trillions of cells are in constant communication with each other. It's uh, it's remarkable. It's unbelievable. There is a great book by a guy called Dr. John Leaf, Lieff, called The Secret Language of Cells, that explains in as non-technical language as is possible what is going on. And it is mind-blowing, mind-blowing. This system of trillions of cells processes about 11 million bits of information per second.
Wow.
Now, consciousness, you can only process about 40 bits of information. Right? So we have this amazing mind body sensing, perceiving everything that's going on around us, trying to interpret it. And it will send to your consciousness an idea of what's going on. So, we might be walking along and, oh, there's a snake. Oh, better step back from the snake because we'll see survival is the high priority for the brain. So if
Hmm.
there's any risk, it's going to be overvalued. Okay, oh, man, there's a snake. And then you look down and say, oh, no, it's a piece of rope. Okay. Now, when you said it's a snake, oh, it's a snake, you weren't actually thinking that in the sense that you had worked your way to it. You were simply aware of it. So there's a difference when we think about consciousness between awareness, oh, I'm aware that something's going on, and agency, oh, I made that happen. right? Okay. So, oh, I put my hand on the hot stove. Oh, good job. I made a decision to pull it away. No, you didn't. Your hand had already pulled away long before you'd even thought about pulling it away. All right. So, this is important, this distinction between being aware of something and actually consciously planning it and doing it. Joe Montana, the famous San Francisco quarterback, said, "When I was playing, I was not conscious." Now, he didn't mean he was unconscious. He meant that consciously he wasn't doing the actions. He trained his mind body, as many athletes, musicians do, trained his mind body so well that his consciousness had to keep out of it. Because if it gets involved, you screw up, right?
Mm.
Right? So there's this difference between I'm aware of something and I actually thought of something, right? So one of the things that you're talking about is, as you look at the Simon Kelly Martinez, all these things start popping into your head. It's not like you have said, let me think about this. Now, you might have done when you got further down, but initially it was all these things popping into your head, given to you by your mind body based on your experience and the things that you're interested in, and so forth, right?
Right.
Now somebody else looking at that who has a friend called Kelly Marshall, the thing might have popped into their head. Oh, that sounds like Kelly Marshall. Oh, I wonder how Kelly's doing.
Right.
So it's a totally different thing based on experience. And those initial thoughts are being presented to you. You're aware of them, but you're not thinking them. Now, afterwards, you step back and say, Kelly Martinez, let me think. I wonder, was she? Well, I wonder, and then you are sort of more consciously moving things about. But a lot of the time, especially with insignificant things or seemingly ones, that's what happens. Things pop into our mind. We simply accept them. That's it. And we really haven't thought about them in the way of thinking as being an active step. It's in our consciousness because it's been put there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is very important to understand. Very important to understand how the mind and consciousness works, because it's so easy for us for that then to become the habitual way, right, in which we respond to things. One of my better lines is, it could be your thought, somebody else's thought passes through the unguarded gate of inattention onto the welcoming fields of conformity and what you want to believe. It's in our minds. Oh, yeah, well, yeah, that's right. I believe that, or what have you. It's not really thinking. It's being aware of things that are popping up into your head. And so that's important because, as I say, so much of what we do and many people, that's actually how they operate. They don't stop to think. They don't stop to not even do a deep dive, but even just consider a few other points,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so that's one aspect of where being wise, which is understanding the thought process, helps you see that, wait a minute, that's a bit too rash. I need to step back from that, and I really need to apply some thinking, not just let this wash over me and move on, right?
Yeah. And it's being able to take that pause and then remember to take action on it when you can, right? Obviously, I couldn't have done anything while I was driving.
Right, right.
but people, so do you find and I don't, we're going to talk about identifying thinking errors. Is that what this could be considered, is a thinking error, or do you have specific framework for identifying thinking errors?
This is a sort of default setting of the brain that will definitely lead to thinking errors. Okay.
Okay.
Let me touch on a couple of default settings from the brain. As I like to point out, Apple and all these tech companies bring out an upgrade to their products, every few months. The human brain hasn't had an upgrade for a very, very long time. And so to some extent, we really still have the brain of prehistoric man. And, what was he interested in? Survival, not getting
Mhm.
eaten, surviving disasters, and getting enough food to eat. And that was it. And we still have the brain that is geared to thinking that way. So survival is a priority. Now, because of that, the brain uses 25% of our energy, and it needs to conserve energy. And thinking, not just watching what's going through your head, but actually thinking hard on something takes up a lot of energy. If we were walking along in a pleasant San Diego neighborhood, and I said to you, Kathy, what's 4 times 9 divided by 6 plus 5 times 2? You probably have to stop walking to do that, okay? Because it takes a lot of energy, and it's tough to do that sort of arithmetic sum and walk at the same time. So we look to conserve energy, which leads to these shortcuts. And that's fine for things that are insignificant,
Mhm.
decisions that aren't really important. What should we watch on TV? Where should I go to dinner? What should I have for lunch? We don't need to do a big deep dive there, and this sort of skim over the surface is fine. The problem is that it then potentially has the risk of becoming the way you think about everything. And then that becomes problematic. So some of the brain, the emphasis on survival, wants to save energy, shortcuts. Some of the implications of shortcuts are the brain can only focus on one thing at a time.
That's
Okay.
interesting to hear, right?
Okay. Yeah. I
In
mean,
this multi-screen,
oh,
multifaceted life with
yeah.
movements, right?
Right. But at any one microsecond, the brain can only focus on one thing. Now, multitasking is focusing on one thing, moving to the next, coming back to the first. But we can't hold in our consciousness more than one thing at a time. Imagine being able to hold in your consciousness 8 things at a time. I mean, we can't imagine that. It's just mind-boggling. So we can only do one thing at a time. Yeah, we can switch quickly, but we can only do one thing at a time. Now, what that means is that in our thinking, it becomes very efficient, or at least economic, to reduce things to 2 choices.
Mhm.
Because if you have to compare 5 things, that's way too difficult. 2, well, maybe we can just about manage it. So any decision you've ever had to make of any significance, who to hire, for example, where to go to school, any of those, what do? We reduce it to
The
2
two.
things because it's so much easier to, it's really difficult comparing more than 2. And
Yeah.
moreover, I'll let you go
I
in a
have a
second,
question.
more if it,
Question,
good.
question.
And moreover, when we're looking at 2 things, no matter how similar they are, the brain is looking for differences between those 2 things. It is fundamentally biased in that respect.
Okay, my question now. So, and this has to do with choices presented to people to make their choices. And I don't know if it's psychology driven or if people are making mistakes, let's say in the digital world on a website when they're comparing features. And they more than not put 3 features. It's not, do you want A or do you want B? Do you want blue? Do you want red? It's, do you want the basic? Do you want the middle? Do you want the more complex? Is that from a psychological standpoint overstimulating the brain, or are you forcing your brain to go someplace where it doesn't have to make as many choices? What's the psychology behind presenting those 3 choices, and are people making mistakes?
No, they're doing it very deliberately, and here's what they're doing. This course, you can get this much for $99, you can get this for $3.99, or you can get this for $7.99. They are assuming that people are going to wipe out the $7.99. In making those 2 choices, they're going to wipe out $7.99. Then they're going to make a choice between the 99 and the $3.99. Now, the $3.99 has a lot more value because you've eliminated something that's better, but it's more expensive. And I think the research shows that when you do something like that, most people are going to choose the 399, right? So again, yes, it is this. I got to eliminate one. Well, this is
Yes.
great, but I don't think it's worth it. But then that increases the value of the second one relatively, and so that's why they're doing that. You don't see, and I don't really would understand the point of doing it somewhere where you got four choices,
Well, of
right?
course, I'm thinking that, right. So, but then there's a second line. What else?
Right,
What else do I
right,
have to look at
right,
to
right.
see that is there
Yeah,
more? Am I
yeah,
making the
yeah,
best decision?
yeah. That's exactly right. And so that's, instead of saying, oh, it's 99 or 199 and 399, you make it 99, 399, and 799, assuming that no one's going to buy the 799, but it is going to drive more people to the 399.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently that's what the research shows and the practice shows, which is why you see it so commonly. Good question.
Yes, you guys are getting more value than you bargained for today. So let's talk more about some more thinking errors.
So we have the things that we talked about, the binary thinking. It's either this or that,
Okay.
which can be limiting. We've talked about the need for survival, so that will come first.
I'm going to make some notes too in the chat while you're saying that. Go ahead.
Okay, and because survival is important, human beings tend to be risk averse, which means, for the most part, they're going to avoid risk unless the opportunity comes up, it seems better. So, for example, I'll say, Kathy, you can give me $10. I'm going to play a game, and you could win 15 back. And you'd probably say, come on. Well, there's no point in doing that. If I said, you can give me 10, win again, and you could win $90 back, oh, now you might be more interested because the ratio has changed. But up to about 2.5 to 1, which would be, oh, you could win $25 plus your $10 back, we tend to be risk averse. It's not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that seems to be a common theme. And obviously there's some outliers who are more risky and take risk, but generally that's what it is. And so what do? We are people who accept some of the things that are just thrown up to us by our mind body as a perception. We tend to accept it. We tend to think in binary terms. We are survival oriented. In other words, really want to avoid such stress. And in some ways, we are storytellers, just interested in emotional comfort, feeling okay. And we can justify anything we want. And we do that through the use of cognitive biases for the most part, and the cognitive biases, and there's quite a number of them, maybe 200 of them. The ones that are most commonly known are the most valuable ones. And of those, confirmation bias is the most important. And confirmation bias is we look for information that justifies our decisions and the things we want to believe, and we either ignore or not just dismiss, but information that disagrees with our opinion. And one of the things that has happened is that social media has really, really enhanced that. I mean, that's always been a part of human beings, but social media, which is so divisive, right? Which encourages people to be rude and nasty. And, if you don't believe with their opinion, they can tell you to do whatever they want in a comment, which, if they were face to face with you, probably wouldn't happen. So we've got used to this. It's very divisive. We find our tribe, we defend our tribe. And so we can use confirmation bias to justify anything that we want, even that we didn't land on the moon, um, you know, you name it. And anyone says to me, Howard, do you believe we really landed on the moon? I mean, come on, we never landed on the moon. My response is, really? You believe there's a moon? Come on.
So let's talk for a second about just bias in general, conscious bias, because we're speaking to a vast audience of
Mm-hmm,
potentially,
mm-hmm.
30,000 people. Define it on simple terms for us, conscious bias.
Cognitive bias, really,
Cognitive bias, yes.
because sometimes we're not conscious. A lot of the time, we're not conscious that we're doing that. Cognitive biases are just sort of rules that enable us to justify whatever we want. Okay. So, for example, one of them is the normalcy bias. And the normalcy bias is the assumption that, you know what, things aren't really ever going to change much. It's still going to be the same. Yeah, tell that to all the retailers who went bust because they didn't anticipate appropriately internet shopping.
Mhm.
And we can all think of several, maybe of our favorite stores, no longer in business because they assumed, people will still want to go to shops. They won't buy online. Wrong. Normalcy bias. They just wanted to believe that, right?
Mhm.
Justify it. Justify it. Anchoring bias is actually an important one. Anchoring bias is that the initial concepts brought up in any conversation sort of anchor it. Now, this comes from negotiation. If we're negotiating and I say, okay, well, I'll do it for $75. And you say, no, no, I only want you to do it for $40. Okay, now we've sort of anchored the conversation, or it seems that way. But that's what happens a lot. We now assume that the middle ground is between 45 and 75. But anchoring can influence the narrative a lot. And you don't realize that because you've started at this point. Now that point sets the tone for everything else that comes. And so
I could
anchoring is
see how
important.
that works hugely in sales, in a sales conversation, right? And that's why you would
Absolutely.
ask more discovery questions to find out where that person's going. So then you find your anchor, so
Yes,
to
that's
speak.
right. You want it to be their anchor, not yours.
Yes.
And indeed, um, I've written books on communication. I'm doing a course on that too. Um, One of the mistakes that people make in communication, especially when they're trying to achieve something rather than just vent, is they are not strategic, right? They just take their own point of view. No, you need to take the other person's point of view and understand where they're coming from and meet them where they're at if you really want to be strategic. And that means asking them a lot of questions to find out where they're at, listening very carefully to find out where they're at, and then having got those anchors, being able to channel your communication to that framing that you have discovered. And I said I wrote a book on communication. I was in my psychology career probably 20 years, sort of well known for behavior change, around typical habits, weight loss, smoking, what have you. And I suddenly realized, I've got all this great education. Nobody has ever taught me about communication. Because if you're trying to get people to change, don't you think that communication is important?
Yes.
Right. And so I got to a point where, if somebody came, said, well, I've tried so many times, I want to quit smoking. My reaction was, well, why the hell do you want to quit? Not, oh, well, of course you need to quit because it's so bad for you. Blah, 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 blah. That's my motivation, not his. It's
Hmm.
irrelevant. And he's heard it all before and it hasn't worked. So that's not going to work. Tell me why the hell you want to quit. I want to know. Right. And So that actually led me to do a lot of research on communication, and there's some really great tools and strategies devised by people that certainly can be misused if it's not the principal's fault if you misuse a concept to swindle somebody. But there are powerful tools there, and they really are about meeting people where they're at. And you mentioned Brene Brown earlier.
Hmm.
Authenticity. Authenticity. Authenticity is huge. It's huge. I talked about, my mistakes and what happened to me. And I'll reveal that. I had a very, very brief, very consensual relationship with a former client. And I lost my license to practice psychology. And what I've realized since then, and I was so sensitive about that subsequently, anyone wanted to work with me, I'd say, well, wait, time out, I got to tell you this.
My story.
I got to tell you my story. And for the most part, I mean, 95% people would not say, well, you're an idiot. I'm not going to work with you. It was, well, thank you for telling me that. I really appreciate your honesty, because people don't expect you to tell them their dirty laundry when you don't have to. But for me, it is a sign you have dealt with it appropriate that you can. It's a bit like trauma. I had Dr. Bob Moore, trauma specialist, on my How Not to Think podcast, and he said something that absolutely related to. I thought it was really cool. He said, if you're looking at somebody and they're telling you about their trauma and they start to cry, they haven't resolved it.
Yes.
And I feel the same way, that if I'm talking about my experience and I start to feel, shame and guilt and what have you, I haven't dealt with it. I can look at it authentically and say, yeah, I screwed up. Yep.
Yes.
And people appreciate authenticity. It's not weakness, I don't think.
I had that. I was on a podcast yesterday, and I was talking for the first time, I believe, about the death that I've experienced in the past 18 months, which I counted them up, death and loss, and with one that fell out of this time frame, there were 8,
Oh,
and I listed them, and I thought, am I going to be able to get through this podcast talking about the strength that I have, about my resilient spirit, if you will, go back to Brene Brown's label. Am I going to be able to get through this without crying? Because the name of the podcast was Tendrils of Grief. So those tendrils of trauma, even when we process it and we go on to process it, I mean, like I work with a hypnotist. She goes, you don't get to just choose you're going to get through your grief. I'm going to schedule grieving at 3 p.m. and then that's it, right? You don't choose it.
right.
So trauma shows up, right? There's tendrils of trauma to our core. It doesn't mean it defines us. It means it becomes a part of who we are. But how are we going to use that experience to shape the new us? Right? It's a new us.
Yep.
It's a new shoe. It's a new opportunity. It's a new opportunity to inspire. It's a new opportunity to educate, to do whatever you want to do to take shape with your new you. But in your opinion, as people are processing trauma, as people are processing grief, whatever, I believe that talking about it, for me, the way I process, writing about it and talking about it does put me in a different part of my brain that helps me get through it. To share that
Absolutely.
experience helps me walk
Absolutely.
through the fire, because I'm not taking this victim mentality. It's more of, and then, it then
Right.
becomes a dialogue and a story.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with that. Getting it out of you And
Mm-hmm.
again, it's trapped there in the mind body, remember? So we got to get this out in many different ways: writing, talking about it, thinking about it. Um, those are important. Those are really important. And you can't hang on to them. And this is one of the problems with the victim mindset. Now, this don't misunderstand what I'm saying. Horrible things happen to people. There's
Mm-hmm.
no question about that. No question about it. However, that doesn't mean they're going to have to be stuck with it. The only person who can really solve that problem is you. Now, you're going to need quite a lot of help from other people, but that's you. And you have to have the courage and the strength and the resilience and the mindset, all of those things to start this journey. And then as you do, you will find it to be an amazing journey, a great one. I like to call my journey Ranger Training for the Soul.
Oh, I like
Okay.
that.
Thank you. It's, you have to do that. You have to do that.
Yes.
And it's sad when you see people who can't seem to get off on that journey and stay stuck. And people who encourage them to be defined by that problem, to stay a victim to that for whatever reason, are not being helpful at all.
No. And yeah. And it's difficult sometimes to be on the sidelines to support people as laymen, not as a professional, to support that journey. It's not my journey. I can't take it on.
Right.
Right. But I'm
Right.
here.
Right. Yeah.
I'm here to cheer. I'm here to hand you tissue,
Right.
but it's not I cannot take that on for
I
you.
can't do it for you. Right.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
So we need to move so we can wrap. Thank you so much, everybody that stayed on for the whole thing. Now we're going to talk about solutions and how to implement them for
Right.
some of the thinking errors that we have.
Right. Right.
Let's move over to those.
So one of the first things, obviously, before change is awareness. So understanding these limitations that I've outlined
Mhm.
and how we can simply accept things and what have you, being aware of that is important. And one of the things, especially when you're talking about important decisions, one of the things that's really key is when we're thinking about something, we have what we will take we extract the information that we have, and then we ditch the rest of it, right? Now, that part that we don't look at is called X formation. And what wisdom is to understand that in that X formation, there's probably some really good stuff you can't afford to ignore, okay, in your desire to make it quick or easy, right? And so that's part of it. And just as knowledge of that is, okay, what am I missing here? What am I missing? One of my favorite quotes is by British statistician George Box, who said about scientific theories and models, all models are wrong, some are useful. And I think that's an awesome way to think about our thinking. All our ideas are wrong in some way, but some of them might be really useful, okay? It's not, oh, yeah, I've got the answer. It's totally correct. Well, unless you're playing a game, that's about the only thing where there are set rules and everyone agrees to them. Unless you're playing a game, that's not the case. The world's not like a game as much as we try to make it like that.
The game of
And
life.
so
Yes.
the game of life is to understand. A good question is, what am I missing? And if this is wrong, but it could be useful, what is it? Where is it wrong? And where is it useful? Again, we're getting away from binary simplicity, saying, oh, yeah, that's the answer and that isn't. Nah, got to dig deeper. And understanding these conscious processes, I think, will help people realize that a lot of their thinking is automatic. It's not really thinking. It's stuff passing through our heads. And for those really important decisions, you really need to take time to sit, think, research, talk, ask, okay? Because there'll be things that you hadn't realized.
Yeah.
And one great tool for developing wisdom, I think, is mindfulness and mindfulness exercises, which are about simply being in a relaxed state of mind. And instead of trying to judge and process everything that's coming in, you just experience
You
it.
just sit with it.
Just sit with it and
Yes.
experience it. You're not trying to interpret, because as soon as you have an image of what something is, that's what you'll see, right? But if you say, oh, no, I'm not going to put an image down here, I want to see what comes up, then you're training yourself to be much more open-minded.
Yeah, those skills, the do we want to call it the skills? They do come with experience, quieting that mind, um, seeing the pictures as they flow in, and just noting it and whisking it off and waiting for that next image to play
Mm-hmm.
of what it is. With my mindfulness, I try to, not try, I do, I set an intention. Like, here's the decision, here's the quiz, here's the answer that I'm looking for. Let me light a candle, let me go into meditation, but let me explore the images that might
Right.
come.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And those
Exactly.
those are really great practices to have. You don't need anything. You've got
No,
everything
they're
you need within you.
right. And they really are, because um, it's so easy for us with our history and experience to go along and just conform to everything we know and believe, think, without ever really stopping to think, well, wait a minute, is that appropriate? You know, I have this dream. No, it's not a dream. It's a hypothetical idea that at some point in the future, there'd be some sort of technological thing where you could reveal an opinion or an idea.
Sorry, keep
Oops.
going.
You could reveal an opinion or an idea, and then it will tell you,
Keep
when did
going.
you first when did you first get that idea? Who was with you? Why did you have that idea? And so on and so forth, so that um, you could actually look at the origin of your thoughts and beliefs and opinions and where they came from. And I suspect we would be surprised, Well, why do why are you a Democrat or Republican? Well, that's a good question. Let me ask that. Yeah, I remember growing up, my dad talking to me about this.
Yeah, my
Okay.
grandma, right?
Oh,
This is
yeah.
my
Oh,
grandma.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or where did the idea come from? Did you ever think about it? Did you ever research it? Or did it just slip gently into your mind onto those field of acceptance and conformity without questioning? And that I think would be a really interesting development to be able to do that. But the point is, even though we can't do that, we can, by asking that question or posing that, we could see, that's an interesting one. I
Hmm.
wonder where I really did get that idea.
Right. Now, in your upcoming book or in your upcoming course,
Yeah.
um, is it called The Art of Wisdom?
It's called A Course in Wisdom, and my
Okay.
book is called Falling to Grace, The
Okay.
Art and Science of Redemption.
Okay.
Okay, so that book's out in a couple of days. Falling to Grace, The Art and
Well,
Science of Redemption.
congratulations. Yes.
Thank you. It does have workbook for people stuck in, shame, humiliation, and disgrace, and a workbook for people trying to help them. Because as you say, there's a very definite role for support, and there's definitely things you don't want to do, right? You don't want to tell people just to suck it up. That doesn't help. You don't want to tell people, oh, yes, I'm so sorry, it's terrible. Oh, you poor victim. That doesn't help either, right? But there are things they will need help with, and maybe you can offer that. So there's a workbook there.
That sounds super interesting. Do you have a link I can put? Is it going to be available on Amazon? Where can
Yes, it's
people
going to
find?
be available. It's available on Amazon. Falling
Okay.
to Grace: The Art and Science of Redemption, and actually, an interview with me is going to feature in the May issue of Psychology Today. So
Congratulations on that too.
I'm looking forward to see how that comes out. So we live in strange times, and social media certainly made our world very divisive, made being critical and nasty sort of a somehow a valued thing, which is really a shame.
It feels icky, but when you were just talking, it's easier for
Oh
some,
yeah,
right? It's just
yeah.
easier. And then it's that rolling stone that's gathering moss, right? The nasty roll. People can just jump on it, right? Because
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
already emotion versus somebody standing up and going, wait a minute,
right,
right? That
right.
opposing view, which makes people think and stop.
Yeah, and actually think about that. Think about if you were talking with somebody, you met someone at a party or what have you, you don't really know them, they were talking and you disagreed with them. Would you talk to them the way you would respond to somebody on Facebook, for example?
Well, I think people have lost practice, in all
They
honesty.
have. No,
They
they have. No, absolutely.
I mean, I was talking about that with someone today. Like, it's so much easier and efficient to do
Right.
work through audio, video, versus getting in the car and getting in traffic and experiencing anxiety, and then all those other things that can happen on the way to an in-person interaction. That maybe by the time you arrive there, you're already in a different mindset
Mm-hmm.
than what would happen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh
I mean,
no, no.
we're into this interesting time.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. There are people on Facebook. I tend to try and be amusing on Facebook, and we exchange a lot of laughs and what have you. And if I pass them, there's a lot of energy and laughs. I pass them in the street, they'll barely say hello. Hello. Oh, hi. The difference is ridiculous.
Maybe they should have been a ghostwriter, right?
Maybe.
All right. Well, I'm going to wrap the show, and I so appreciate the dialogue, the words, the wisdom, the intelligence, all of that we've had. I know there's been some guests. They're going to look for your book, Falling to Grace. Your website I put in the show notes.
Right.
I don't believe we're friends on Facebook, but I can invite you to join even our group, the Modern Sales
Absolutely.
Professionals. I welcome exciting dialogue and a community. We're building a community of people
Right.
I want wise people, wise women, wise people that stop and think. Stop and think.
That's it. That's all we're looking for.
Don't just that second that you take to think before you respond or you act. It shifts we won't get into that, right? But it shifts your mind to a different
no
part.
question.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. So great. You guys that are still with us, any last questions? Do you have, for Dr. Rankin, do you have any questions? Do you want to know anything else? There's people with us on, let's see, we've got Facebook. We've got somebody watching us on Twitch. Any questions for my guest before we wrap the show? As you know, it will be evergreen on all of the channels so that you can rewatch and contact him. And I'm excited to even have you back after your book is there. Maybe we can have a little workshop with the book or something. How do you handle things? Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
All right.
Happy to do that.
All right.
Always
So,
good.
any closing comments yourself?
No, I do think that this is important. One of the things that makes it maybe a little bit of a difficult sell in the sense is when you say, well, who is this for? Well, you say, well, it's for everybody, which is, of course, the worst answer you can give to somebody who's
especially
trying
if you
to
work
promote.
with me, you know that. Yes.
Well, no, but it's true. If you say to a publisher, well, who's this book for? And you say, everybody, forget it. They're not interested. But of course, in some ways it is for everybody. But I think that people whose business focuses around making important decisions every day, trying to sort out the narratives that are coming from different parts of the organization, just trying to understand, plan strategy, those sorts of things. This is important. Mm-hmm. This is important. And it doesn't really require, a big degree and, whatever. if that's going to work, you have to understand how the mind works so that you can deliver that in a very effective way.
Yes. Yes. And I wouldn't say manipulation comes into to mind, right? But I'm very strategic in my thought process and understand, like, if we understand how our thoughts work, it it just sets us up for success versus failure. Something
Yep.
comes in, where's it going to go? What tools can I use to help process things? Do I need to sleep on a larger decision overnight because that's how my brain thinks? Do I have this little thinking algorithm or rubric
Mm-hmm.
that they use,
Mm-hmm.
right? Do I
Mm-hmm.
have a little
Right.
rubric set up for decision making, whether it's emotional, financial? How am I making decisions? I can train myself to make better decisions with different skill
Right.
sets.
Right. And all models are wrong, some are useful.
And all models
Uh,
are wrong, some are useful.
and that's a good way of looking at it. In what way is this wrong? Is it critically? And in what way is it useful? And I think asking yourself that question would be a very good start to being more aware and less likely to fall into the traps that I've described that are there simply because that's how we're made.
Yeah. Very interesting conversation. Can't wait to have another one with you. And I'm going to have to
Likewise.
come visit on the Outer Banks. That's someplace I really want to go visit. We'll see. All right, want to
Okay.
stay on for just a second while I wrap the show. Thank you guys so much for attending the Art of Inspired Selling, where, as you know, it's a long form show where we talk about interesting facts, interesting topics to help you become a better version of yourself. And we show the show airs on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. and you can always find it on katherineevans.net. So thanks so much, you guys. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks again, Howard, for